There was a stillness that came with the early bolts of the rising sun. A calm amid catastrophe, hiding behind a thin veil of swirling dust and the light. I followed it with my eyes, mesmerized by its sway. My head was all but empty of all thoughts. I allowed myself a moment of solemnity, a moment of respite for my aching body. I won, somehow. I persevered and survived. The other lay splayed on the floor, heaped like a rubbish pile. I tried to concentrate. I shut my eyes and listened to the silence of my home. No, he was not breathing, nor making any sound, nor indeed even the slightest of movements. The only noise besides my painful stirring was the scrape and the muffled squeak of a mouse somewhere in a corner. So it ended. The brute lay dead. With my eyes still shut, I drew a deep breath of the stale, dry air of the house. Everything had happened at such a savage pace, I hadn't had any time to collect my thoughts. Gathering and examining them was the only way I hoped to combat dread and fatigue. Another moment of stillness, I decided, would only do me good. And so I reached into my memory to reflect on the horrible chain of events that had left me exhausted and wounded on the floor. It all began as it often does with cries for help. Another one had been murdered. I realized it the moment a shrill cry pulled me out of my sleep. Reeling from a dream, I struggled off my mat, stumbling over the limp, snoring body of my wife and into the street. The sun had not risen, and the first ray was yet to climb over the mountains in the distance. In the stirring darkness, illuminated by nothing but a flickering spark of a watchman's torch on the wall, I saw the shapes of my neighbors, crowding a pitch-black pile on the ground. There was no mistaking what the pile was, and the smell preceded the alerted chatter of men and women. The air reeked of fresh offal. I wondered who was out so early and who had noticed the victim first. There was a commotion and a chaos of voices scrambling over one another. Working my elbows, I managed to get close to the body, the stench now so strong it offended my senses. Someone brought a wick lamp, covering its flame from people's breathing. Its unsteady glow revealed a mangled corpse, mutilated beyond any recognition. With a sigh from a dozen mouths, the crowd backed off. At first glance it was a man, viciously killed and partially consumed. His innards were all gone. Splatters of blood and strips of meat covered the ground around him. His skull was exposed, with a wide crack on the side opening into the emptied cavity. My gut churned, and my spit turned bitter as I looked into his only eye. I thanked the gods I hadn't yet had time to have my morning meal. With a sputter the lamp died. Darkness gave people the courage to approach again. With them came their frightened voices. I knew him. He was a watchman, I perceived someone say in the turmoil. A watchman, I'm certain. What could have mauled him so? There's his spear. It's broken. Did anyone hear the fight? Was it a hyena? No hyena would be bold enough. We have angered the gods. They're taking us one by one until we appease them. Why won't our priests make a sacrifice? The poor watchman was the 5th victim in just 20 days. If there indeed had been a fight, it must have been either a quiet or a swift one, for I hadn't heard a peep through my slumber. The watchman had been slashed and opened just a couple of good steps away from the mud brick walls of my house, while I calmly slept, smiling at my dreams. A truly unsettling thought. I suddenly shuddered, not from the brisk night air, but from the realization that the dark force which had been keeping the entire city quarter in fear had passed so closely by my abode. As sure as the watchman was lying dead, this mysterious force could have barged into my house and left me and my wife as a half-picked set of bones. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a flicker. I turned to see my wife standing in the entrance of our house. She raised the lamp over her mane of uncombed black hair. Her eyes were wandering, dreams still swirling inside as she struggled to shake herself awake. I approached, placing my hands gently on her shoulders. Her eyes locked with mine. There was a mute question hanging in them that required no answer. From my pale mask of a face, sharp in the dancing light, she quickly learned what had transpired so close to home. "Another one, right there," I said under my breath. "Just come inside, don't look," she whispered back. "Too late for that." I spent what time remained before the first glint of dawn in agitated contemplation. I was lying on my mat, each deep breath filled with the pungent odor of the oil lamps my wife lit around the home. In their dim light, I cast my glance up to the dark ceiling. I couldn't shake off the awful vision of the body lying just outside, no doubt under a dozen stairs. Its misshapen form hovered before me. Each crevice and bend of the ceiling reminded me of this wound or that bone. The sight of the disfigured Watchman was beyond grievous. My stomach still churned, bile rising and falling to my throat and back. The mere thought of a meal made me sicker still. 5 murders had already been committed, but the entire community of Ahrit's vast craftsman's quarter couldn't even begin to suspect anyone. The killings were bloody, messy, beastly even. The victims had nothing in common, be it family, status or otherwise. When the first body had been discovered on the quarter's labyrinthine narrow streets, we all thought it was nothing more than a common murder, so no one was truly alert yet. After the second murder, the matter was brought to the vizier. After the third, the Lugu was made aware. After the fourth, the entire city was abuzz with the news of some evil force sweeping through the streets at night, taking lives only the gods know for what offense. This one no doubt would put the city into a frenzy. Even the Divine Council, after the fourth body was discovered, retired for a lengthy deliberation, trying to determine which god and how we had offended. And, more importantly, what was to be done now to bring peace back to the streets of Ahrit. Only a couple of days had passed between this murder and the last one. The decision by the priests had not yet been made. So far, each killing had been committed at night. But what if this force were to strike in daylight next? I dreaded going to work and leaving my wife alone. But if I dared to stay home, our family rations and my pay in silver would be immediately cut. Master Masons cared little for my fears. In the soothing quiet of my home there appeared a hushed chant. I raised my head to witness my wife praying to our little wooden figure of Naimet. Cozily occupying the niche over the entrance, its offering bowl brimming with aromatic oil, Naimet appeared pacified in the light of the lamps. With a clay token of protection in each of his 4 hands, flickering light animating his stiff form, he looked as though he were trying to reassure us. Perhaps, I thought, it was him we had somehow displeased. After all, he was the divine custodian, the peacekeeper. But for the last 20 days our streets knew no peace. And the time between murders had only been shrinking. Or had we gravely offended the patron of our great city, the father of stars, Shatters? I waited for my wife to finish her prayer. "Do you think we should draw a notice tablet to the vizier?" I asked. "The entire city will know of this by midday," my wife said as she moved to the vessel of barley in the corner. "The vizier too. It's not up to him or the Watchman anymore. It's up to the priests." I found no words for a proper reply. A hesitant shrug was all I could offer. Overwhelmed by morose thoughts, I stared at the figurine of Naimet. With each moment that passed, its jittery dance in the lamplight slowed its pace. Its lines turned once again rigid, and its carved face regained its noble, unassailable presence. The light of day was kindling outside, smothering the weak efforts of our oil lamps. The morning first shifted from pitch black to deep blue, then to grey, stripped of all color, then grew rosy red. Finally, the liquid gold of the sun poured over houses, ziggurats, temples, palaces, canals, fields, and people. Furtively, I peeked outside. The crowd was still there, albeit thinned, chattering and undulating. Through the wall of their legs I could see the horrible carcass. A familiar yet unwelcome scent distracted me from this grisly scene. First I felt a rush of hot air on my back. Then I caught a waft of warm bread and the sour, hearty smell of barley beer. My wife was preparing our morning fare. The inviting odor made me retch as I imagined an evil spirit, a mamul, devouring the Watchman in the dead of night. Through the chill of the morning, through the haze of the midday's heat, and into the gathering shadows and the crimson glow of the evening, whenever there was time for repose, rest, a break from labor, there was talk of the murdered Watchman. Everyone, it seemed, already knew. My wife was right. There were no tablets needed. At first in the morning I treated such conversations with other masons as a welcome chance for destruction. By noon I wished I lived in the desert. Everyone, from the lowest apprentice to the master mason overseeing our work on the decrepit section of the city wall, craved fascinating first-hand details from me. After all, the corpse was found outside my dwelling. In truth, I had nothing of interest to offer. It was just another victim of the same evil spirit. At that time, I had already firmly settled into a belief that a mere human couldn't cause such devastation to one's body. It had to be a mamul. And if a humble mason could reach this conclusion, our priest's reticence seemed that much more irritating. And the flock of masons was of the same opinion. "It's strange, there," one of them said to me, uninvited into a conversation and unprovoked to speak. We'd been plastering the wall next to one another, and the master mason kept a hawk eye on the quality. "Why are our priests silent? It's a demon, surely. Even when there was war between Ahrit and Zedur, I hadn't seen a soldier skinned and stripped of his flesh quite like that. Our priests must hold a ritual, or more people will die. And if we need to provide for a sacrifice, I'd gladly do it. No oil or silver is worth my life, I say." Neck deep in my own thoughts, I barely acknowledged the man, giving a pensive nod to his tirade. When our day's work was finally over, and after the master mason's diligent inspection, I was among the first to leave and head home. Hastening my steps, I tried to separate myself from the chattering crowd of workers. My gut tightened in anticipation of a now decomposed body at my doorstep. I hoped for at least a moment of calm. That moment came as I crossed familiar streets and districts, watching the crimson sunset consume all around, from the dust beneath my feet to the roofs of houses nearby. The overheated air bent to the ground like a weary giant. It was stale and thick like water, hard to breathe. If not for the creeping briskness of the coming evening, penetrating the warmth every now and then. With a heavy heart, I finally turned the last corner before home. To my surprise, the body wasn't there, removed doubtless by other watchmen. The foul odor of rot still lingered in the wind, however, and the flies and other unclean insects were all abuzz, quarreling over the sickening stain the corpse had left in the dust. Wrinkling my face, I circled around it, and then stopped fast. I saw the face of my wife in the dark of the entrance, pale and worried. "I saw it when they removed the poor Watchman," she started. "If I didn't know it was a man, a living man, just the day before, and if not for the horrific stench, I would have thought it was only a pile of food waste. How terrible! Right at our door, too. What if—" I didn't want to follow her trail of thought, for I knew where it led, to the same well of fear I'd been drawing from all day. "The Masons," I interjected, "couldn't stop talking about it too. You were right, the entire city knows." I took a glance back at the place where the body was and continued. "It seems that the farther people live from these bodies, the more morbid curiosity they have rather than any worry. I, for one, have only worry." My wife stepped aside, letting me into the welcoming twilight of our home, filled with the scents of spices, oils, and incense. I turned my head to see a fresh bowl of offerings for Naimet. His stoic face gave me no clue if he was the one offended. The waning daylight was still spilling into our inner courtyard, painting the mud brick walls pink. If not for the dread of the previous night, it would be a peaceful end to a hectic day. But as we sat at our meal, just as stoic as Naimet watching us from his niche, we couldn't help but take turns throwing glances at the looming entrance. There, in the thickening darkness, was the stain, like a mark for death. The rest of the time was spent in prayer and in talks about priests and their tardiness. When I finally stretched on my mat, I fell into a sticky, shallow nightmare. Right until a noise of some nature, which I couldn't at first distinguish, pulled me out. I was so confused by my sudden awakening that I couldn't tell if there indeed was any noise, or if it was something out of my nightmare. As I stirred, I only knew there was something outside, something that called for my body to rouse itself. Slowly, gradually, I grew to recognize my surroundings and understand where I was. Home, on my mat, next to my sleeping wife. I rose on my elbows. Was there anything, or had I dreamed it? I froze with my ear to the wind. At first, there was nothing but the common whispers of the night. But then, through the dark hall of the entrance, I perceived a faint rattle. Not even a sound, only a suggestion of one. It was alien, a sound I hadn't heard the nights of the craftsman's quarter produce. Another rattle followed the first, then a muffled cough, a thud of something pushing against the mud brick wall. My mouth grew dry. It could have been anyone or anything, a watchman, a vagrant, even a thief, or indeed the Mamu, wandering in the night in search of a life to ravage. I shook my head, trying to chase cowardly thoughts away. Afraid, but pulled irresistibly by that deadly, ruinous curiosity that had ended many lives since the beginning of time, I slowly rose. Infinitely cautiously, as quietly as I could force myself to, I peered outside into the dark street. The moon was dressed in clouds that night. Like fireflies, the torches of Watchmen were swaying away and above, on the city wall. With my eyes still weary from sleep and unaccustomed to the dark, I couldn't see past my own fanned palm. Soon, however, as I skulked toward the source of the sound, guided by memory and touch alone, I began to discern faint lines, forms, and knots of thicker shadows. One particular silhouette drew my attention. It was definitely not a Mamu, but a person of flesh and bone, stumbling, reeling back and lurching forth, as infirm on their feet as a drunkard too fond of his date wine. The sight was, I admit, a relief. Never before had the figure of a drunken drifter made me so reassured. That was when I made my first mistake of many to come. I called out to the stumbling shade. "Friend," I said, my voice now brimming with light-hearted confidence. "Are you lost?" In an instant the stranger froze. The shape visibly struggled to turn to the sound of my voice. When it did, it staggered toward me. It was only a few steps away when a roaming cloud tossed its weight off the moon, letting the celestial light pour down. It allowed me but a moment to study the person approaching me, but that moment was enough to make me regret my intrusion. It was a man of fearsome stature. His ragged mane hung like a dry bush, covering his body and what was left of his tunic far past his shoulders. On proper scrutiny, he seemed not drunk, but in some sort of a daze, as though invisible hands were tugging on him from all sides at every step. His arms were unusually long and wiry, his shoulders wider than any man I'd seen. The strangest thing yet was his face, tormented, contorted as though from ceaseless pain. His clothes were reduced to mere tatters clinging to his intimidating frame. In the treacherous moonlight, the stranger appeared feral, like a cave-dwelling beastman of a distant age, like a brute. His face, however, struck me as being vaguely familiar. I was sure I had seen him somewhere on the streets of the quarter before. Alas, I could not recall his name. The face I was staring at, lined silver by the moon, was shriveled and too small for the head it wished to fit, as if pulled over someone else's larger skull. Then the man spoke. As he did, I fancied I saw a glimpse of red on his lips and teeth. That half-formed observation made me weak in the knees. "Please," he rasped, his voice large and guttural yet trembling. He raised his long arm, crested by a gnarled fist. I cowered for a moment, frightened that he was about to bludgeon me over the head. But instead, he lowered it and, with visible effort, opened a dry, empty palm in front of my face. "Can you spare some food? Do you have some? I'm hungry. So hungry. Anything, bread, even grain." A rush of disgust washed over me. The man was so repulsive I could barely hold myself from taking a step back or wrinkling my face. But as hideous as he was, after disgust came pity. The man looked wretched and pathetic. His restless eyes darted up and down, meeting mine every now and then with a fawning glint. Against my better judgment, I extended my mercy to him. This was my second mistake. After only a short pause, I reluctantly asked him to follow me. I led him to my home. The man wobbled after me, at times almost tipping over before managing to regain his balance. When I approached my home, there was light wandering inside. My wife was up, no doubt stirred by the sound of laboring steps outside. As I paused in the entrance, I saw my wife, still half asleep, standing before me in flickering shadows. It took her a brief moment to strain her eyes and realize that it was me. Her face brightened with relief, but there was also a muted question in her eyes. I stepped in and aside, allowing the brute to come through. When my wife saw the monstrosity that crossed the threshold of our home, she gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. She stepped back, terrified, one step, two, before her back pressed against the wall. Quietly and as discreetly as she could, she made a sign of protection. I still noticed it and raised my hands in warning, but the stranger didn't seem to mind, as he didn't even look at my wife. Instead, he had already started combing our dwelling with his stare in search of food. "Please, good people," he repeated. Something to eat." My face tense, I gave my wife a short nod, and she answered with her own. Putting the lamp she was holding into a niche in the wall, she hurried off, but shortly returned with a loaf of bread. "Oh, thank you." The man stretched out his unnaturally long arms and snatched the loaf. "Thank you." The sight of him eating was perhaps the most vulgar thing I had ever seen. Like a gigantic spider, his long arms making the likeness even more uncanny. He stuffed the bread into his mouth and began to chew. With each movement of his jaw, his misshapen face shriveled even more, as though crawling up his skull and back. He was gnashing, gurgling, coughing as he forced the food down his throat. In no time, there were only crumbs left on the floor and on his wet lips. He then bent down and licked the crumbs off the floor. With that, he looked back at us expectantly. He was not sated by a whole loaf. With a grunt, he sat down on the floor and crossed his legs. I said, looking about me to try and offer something else. "We have more bread here. And beer, too. A bit of lentils. Here, take it. For how long have you been starving?" I placed a big bowl in front of the stranger, filled with bread and lentils. It was then joined by a jug of weak beer. The stranger didn't bother to give me an answer, or perhaps he couldn't give one because his mouth was immediately full. He ate from the bowl like a dog, opening his mouth wider than a human being physically could, and scooping up food with his lower jaw. The gnashing and chomping continued. It was so repulsive that my wife couldn't stand it anymore and rushed out. I heard her retch outside. Then the man downed the entire jug in one go. He sighed, growled, and lurched forward. He pointed at one of the vessels standing next to a wall. Is that barley? I followed his gesture with my eyes. Yes, it was. I nodded in response. May I have some? The question confused me. I narrowed my eyes. It's not cooked. It's just grain. I know. The man jerked his head impatiently. Please? With some hesitation, unsure what to think of the request, I grabbed the vessel by the rims and dragged it to the brute, tilting the heavy thing left and right. What happened next made me nauseous. The man stuck his hands into the vessel, scooped up large handfuls of raw barley, and started swallowing them one by one. He was choking, coiling, clutching his bulging stomach, yet he kept gobbling the grain until the vessel was halved. Only then did he finally lean back. He rose as my wife entered the home again. Thank you, good people, the stranger said with content. Ah, that's a relief. I stood, astonished, lost for words. The night seemed a dream, born of fever and bad food. My wife and I were watching the same nightmare. My stare slid down to the man's stomach and I pondered how a single man could eat so much food and not rupture his intestines. The stranger seemed more present now, and his eyes cleared somewhat. He figured out what I was looking at. I'm still hungry, he smiled. His smile wide and crooked like a skull crack. But you have saved me, good stranger. I thank you both for your hospitality. Here, he added in a tone that suddenly turned sugary. I know just the thing to repay you for your kindness. My wife, out of fright, backed off again as he reached into the tatters of his clothes. I admit I myself resisted the urge to recoil from the abhorrent brute. But to our astonishment, something suddenly gleamed in the unsteady lamplight. In the monstrous hand of the stranger rested a majestic pendant, attached to a chain as regal, stretching to the man's neck and disappearing into his mane. It was a beautiful piece of jewelry, and the fact that it was the stranger's ugly paw that held it out felt simply wrong. He stole it, I thought to myself. I was convinced there was no other way for him to possess such masterwork. The pendant seemed to have been made of two halves, the wider bottom one of gold and the smaller top one of silver, all in the shape of a 12-pointed star. The face of the pendant was adorned with intricate inlays, assembled into a puzzling and mesmerizing pattern. There was a sort of sign in the very center, one I couldn't make out in the half-light. I want you to have it, the stranger continued, watching me study the work of art. As a thanks. My mouth agape with a mix of awe and disbelief, I leaned away. I turned to my wife and gave her a slight shake of my head. She responded by violently shaking hers. No way, her lips read. The offer was beyond generous. It was outrageous and more than ill-matched. This pendant was worth more than all the payments I would have received put together if I toiled for the rest of my days. It was a piece befitting a lugu or a high priest, but not a mason and his wife. The pendant looked exquisite beyond anything I had ever seen. Its worth was high enough to buy the entire city quarter of homes, and as much food as a god could fit into his mouth. Finally, with my hands up, as if guarding against the luxury on display, I turned back to the stranger. We can't accept this. This is too much. You don't need to pay us for our hospitality. Go in peace. I don't know where you got it, but we can't take it. My attention had been completely focused on the man's offering, but as I cast a glance at his face, I noticed that he now looked less brutish. His features fit his head better, and his wide shoulders appeared to have shrunk a bit. If before his meal he seemed more an animal, now he was more human. For a moment he stood there silent, blinking. Then I saw how his hand that was holding the pendant began to quiver. I could see it in his eyes, the moment when he snapped. Suddenly he lunged forward, clutching the pendant. I froze in place, terrified. My wife cried out. The stranger grabbed my shoulder. I felt his long fingernails digging into my skin through my tunic. His mouth was splayed, with threads of saliva flying every which way as he feverishly spoke. There was something in his eyes that horrified me even more. The man was gravely afraid. "Please," he exhaled into my face. "Take it. I need you to take it. Don't you like it? Isn't it beautiful?" My clattering teeth and cracking voice betrayed me. It's too much. We can't. We won't. Please, just go. We don't need any reward." In an instant, he got a hold of himself and was calm again. He licked his lips and looked me straight in the eye, diving deep in search of a true answer. To his dismay, I was all the more resolute in my rejection after his outburst. My thoughts were racing and frantic. The urgency and desperation with which he pleaded with us built a wall of suspicion inside me. He noticed that and let my shoulder go. The pendant disappeared back into the folds of his rags. He smiled, awkwardly. "I just thought that you deserved it. For what you did. Well, if you don't want it..." He took a look around him as though surprised to find himself in our home. "Then you have my gratitude. I should leave now." He tilted to the side to look over my shoulder, at my wife, who was standing all pale in a corner. "I'm sorry if I frightened you." With that, after some tarry, he finally walked out into the night. His heavy steps soon died in the distance. I was left standing in the middle of my house, my knees shaking, my teeth clattering. My wife slid to the floor against the wall. What was that? There were tears in her voice, but I didn't have any words of consolation for her. Reality felt slippery, like in a dream. I couldn't help but be convinced I had welcomed a demon into my home. No matter which profession you hold in Ahrit, mornings are always the time for exchanging news and rumors. The Masons were no exception. I could hear the hum of Masons' chatter even before I could see them. Somehow I already had an idea of what they might tell me. The night left me with a swelling premonition, and, much to my dismay, it was about to come true. With a heavy heart, I walked past the Master Mason and past the scribe, who put a notch on a clay tablet when he saw me. Every man present turned to try and be the first to share the news with me. "Have you heard?" echoed from all sides. I had not, but neither did I need to, for I had already guessed it. Another victim had been found, or rather his half-eaten carcass, tucked away in a dark passageway, heaped into a morbid pile of limbs. There was blood everywhere, they said, but even knowing gossipers' tendency to exaggerate, I believed the description. After all, I had seen one of the victims myself as close as my own hand. I had nothing to add to the news, other than a nod and some words of concern. The other Masons kept on chirping away like birds. As I turned, a vision from the previous night flashed before my eyes, the ghastly red on the lips and teeth of the brute, glowing in the moonlight. Had I truly seen it? Or was it only my imagination stirred by fear? I knew not, but somehow, remembering the terrifying form of the stranger, imagining him a cannibal wasn't that wild of a thought. It was this thought and its kind that plagued me for the rest of the day. As my body was hard at work, my mind wandered far away, traveling back to our nocturnal guest and his ghoulish appearance. I couldn't shake off the sight of him devouring raw barley, so beastly as no man would, asking for more and more and more still. Now that I could examine my memory, unburdened by stiffening horror, I tried to figure out how a man could swallow so much and not burst. His stomach seemed bottomless, truly so. for even an ox would walk away from a trough unfinished if it had so much fodder. When the evening came and our work was nearly done, a noise appeared in the cooling air. At first it seemed like a rolling wave, with no sea or lake near Ahrit to blame it on. My fellow masons and I turned our heads to the sound, but it seemed to come from all sides at once, rising in potency. Soon it became clear that it was the thunder of hundreds of feet and the buzz of hundreds of voices. An enormous crowd emerged and poured into the streets, all bound south to the grand temple of Shatters. In a matter of moments, streets turned into a flood of bodies. Men and women elbowed and grappled with each other to get ahead. At first no one responded to the questions some of us threw at them. One passing woman regarded us. She said there were rumors spreading that the priests had finally come to an agreement and were ready to address the people. The Master Mason was the first to drop his tools and join the crowd. With my heart in my throat, I was close behind. The stampede carried us to the temple, where a sea of people had already assembled, undulating and climbing over each other's heads to get a glimpse of the priestly council. The 5 priests, in clear view atop one of the wide steps before the temple entrance, were discussing something. The noise around grew more and more unbearable, assailing my ears. People clamored and bickered. Finally, the head priest came forth and raised his open palm. At that gesture, all grew eerily quiet. Everyone's eyes were aimed at the 5. "People of Ahrit," the head priest began in a coarse voice, "you have gathered here today for you are starved of answers, and answers we bring. Each night now brings a new victim, and we are confident as to the reason for such a punishment to our city. A grave offense has been made to the temple of Shatters." A whisper of outrage washed over the heads around. The priest continued, "For this offense, Shatters is punishing us. Yes, indeed, we have drawn divine ire upon ourselves. Shatters is sending vicious, flesh-eating mammals to prowl our streets and claim innocent souls to repay for what was done. This is the city of Shatters. We pledged ourselves to him when we built these walls, these homes, and this grand temple. Shatters is our great and revered patron, and there is no room for sacrilege in Ahrit, nor will there be any tolerance for it." I narrowed my eyes at this suggestion. What offense had been made? Who did it and why? There were many more questions than we had answers, and I heard people around whisper the same. Everyone turned to their neighbor and wondered what heinous crime had been committed against the temple. The priests, however, were in no hurry to put us all at ease. Another priest stepped forward to join in on the declamation. "This wretch, this scoundrel knows his crime." He wagged his finger in the air. "I am certain that he is here among us and listens. So come forth and atone, for you, and only you, are the reason that innocent people are dying, mauled by the demons from the stars. Shatters won't relent until your crime is expiated. If you hide, you will find the city empty one day, but you, oh you, Shatters will keep alive to the very last moment to extend your suffering. And when you are at the end of your wit, your soul too will be claimed." A ringing silence descended upon the crowd. All of us stood, eyes darting, breaths loud and heavy. With a clenched gut, I turned my head left and right like a bird, waiting for someone to finally move. But there was no one to dare move. No one stepped forward. The priests were looking at us with quiet contempt, but the crowd stood motionless. I could sense tension rising. Just a moment more, and I felt lightning would jump between us, so braced and keen everyone was. Afraid to be mistaken for the perpetrator, everyone was silent. With so many people standing in front of the temple, there was not a single word uttered under the priest's scrutiny. Finally, I saw the head priest's shoulders sag despondently. He turned around and left. His figure disappeared in the shadows of the temple's entrance. One other priest combed the crowd with one last reprimanding glance and said, You know the price of silence, thief. So be it. They all retired back to the temple, leaving the crowd speechless. I was bewildered. Never before had anything of that sort happened to our city. I felt a cold grip on my heart as I realized that a life, perhaps more than one, would from now on be taken every night until this mysterious criminal answers for his deed. Whatever the deed was. This was when I made my third mistake. As I, wide-eyed, looked at the faces of strangers in the crowd to see if anyone would give themselves away, I noticed someone surprisingly familiar. It took me but a breath's length to realize who it was. It was the same man, our night's guest, the Brute. Now, however, he donned regular clothes, and was of a regular height and constitution. His face fit his head perfectly fine, his hair was short, and his limbs were of ordinary length. For a moment I just stood there, paralyzed, when the crowd began to ebb from the temple. I had no doubt it was him, no matter the form. His face to me was unmistakable, so etched it was into my memory after the night. This time it was just not contorted with pain. I know not if my stare was so oppressive with intent, or if it was because I stood still while the rest of us moved away, but the man also turned and noticed me. For a short while we stared at each other, both standing completely still, like two obelisks tilting in the raging current. The expression on his face was unreadable, but something changed subtly the moment he recognized me, and I was adamant that he did. This was when I finally recalled where I had seen him before. He was one of the poor brickmakers of the craftsman's quarter, one of many. And with that realization the crowd cut the tether between us. I lost his face in the stream of men and women. The same stream picked me up and sped me away from the temple. When I managed to eel my way out of the crush, the man was nowhere to be found. The evening was spent in quiet conversation. As light receded and the sun rode over the horizon, shadows deepened and gained depth. They found my wife and me seated on the floor of our home. She was leaning against the wall, eyes raised to the idol of Nameless. It was hard for me to perceive, but I believed she sat there praying. She knew what I thought, and she thought the same. "I am certain," she uttered to me after some contemplation. "It's him." "The necklace," I nodded. "Yeah, the necklace." She offered another whispered prayer to Nameless for protection. Weak lamps poured their glow softly over her features, and the game of light and shadow made her face as monstrous as that of the nameless brute. "He stole it from the temple, I'm sure of it," she continued, eyes back on me again, "and Shatters is punishing us all for it. If he didn't step forward at the temple gates, he won't do it now." I rubbed my chin pensively. I will go to the vizier and report him. I know who he is, just a brickmaker. I've seen him around before. Or maybe I should go right to the priests. What do you think?" "I think—" Her voice suddenly cracked, and she drew a staggered breath. For a moment a shudder touched her shoulders, which I supposed was just the chill of the night blowing through. However, once our eyes met, I saw a fearful glint in them. "I think that he remembers where we live. I think he'd know if you went. He'd take revenge on us." I recalled the expression on his face when our stares locked in the crush. "You're right," I replied, suddenly sure of it. He would. We went silent for a while. As I pondered further action, she resumed her prayers with a fervor I had rarely seen from her. It was then I rose to my feet and crossed the room to add more oil to the offering bowls, but presently I stopped fast. The budding night was clear and still, but I felt the gentlest touch of moving air. I turned my head toward the blackness of the entrance. With only a moment's delay, a foreign sound joined the waft of air still rubbing against my skin. It was a tapping of 4 feet, much like a stray dog, only much, much heavier. My wife noticed it too and started to her feet. Unwittingly, I spilled the oil I was carrying. Everything happened so quickly that I barely had any time to react. The fluttering waft grew into a strong gust, just as a hulking shadowy figure burst inside. The wind from its assault blew out almost all of the lamps. My wife screamed. I peered into the twisted, shrunken face of the brickmaker. He was in his brutish, beastly aspect. Long arms stretched forward and claws fanned. He was completely naked. The necklace, so pure and regal, dangled from his rugged neck like a ripe fruit. He swept in like a hurricane, and a mighty strike knocked the breath out of me as I spun to the floor. There was the sound of breaking pottery, the shrill screams of my wife, and the brute's beastly grunts. Pain seized my chest, and I rolled with a groan. I clutched my tunic. Through the chaos, I heard with horror how my wife's desperate cry was cut short, followed by a wet, biting sound. I turned onto my stomach and groped for something to defend myself, but my hands found nothing of use around me. All I found was a shard of a bowl which was immediately knocked out of my hand with terrible force. I was tossed, face up, and a great weight pinned me down. I felt the foul smell of blood and rot pour down on me from the maw of the beast. I screamed as his claw crushed my left shoulder. The horrifying face of the brute hovered over me, with his jaws slack and stuffed with dull yellow teeth. A long tongue between them furrowed like a snake. Death, I thought. I was standing on its doorstep. Just a breath more and the brute's jaws would lock on my neck, ripping it open like a piece of bread. The beautiful necklace swung right before my eyes, glistening with the promise of the divine. I did the only thing my racing mind could come up with. With great effort, I threw my right arm up and snatched the necklace, tearing it off and clenching it in my fist. For what purpose, I don't know. In desperation, it seemed like the only thing I could still do. I squeezed my eyes, awaiting oblivion, which never came. First, the load on my chest lightened somewhat. I looked up once more to see the brute shaking over me, tilting left and right, clawing at his own neck, as though an invisible hand were strangling him. Finally, he tipped over and collapsed on the floor. With another cry of pain, I rolled away and struggled to my knees. His form began to shrink rapidly, and the most sickening way one could imagine. I retched. In no time the brute lay twitching, thin and frail like a corpse dried by the desert sun. Kicking, I pushed myself into a corner and cowered there, watching the terrible monster shudder. I watched and watched, afraid to blink. The entire night came and went. Sleeplessly I stared at the brute, waiting for his demise, not yet understanding what caused it. At dawn, when the walls of the room stood grey, he finally ceased moving. I won. I persevered. Here I was, breathing heavily, pain radiating through my entire body from the broken shoulder. The moment of stillness brought clarity, and for the first time since the beastly attack, I raised my numb fist to my eyes and opened my palm. The necklace seemed even more beautiful in the morning twilight, its mesmerizing lines stacked before me, promising things I craved yet couldn't put into words. I tied the ends of the broken chain together. In one swift movement, I put the necklace on. It warmed my chest like a tiny sun. I approached the brute, but found only a pitiful, broken brickmaker lying still on my floor. Why? How? Why the necklace? Could he rise again? Or was it all just a nightmare? I pinched myself. No, it was quite real. With a gasp I turned to a dark, heaping shape across the room. My wife! I rushed over, knowing well what I would find, but suddenly I was overtaken by dizziness. I stumbled and almost fell, but managed to stay on my feet. A sudden fever was burning me alive. The heat came from the necklace. I gripped its chain to try and take it off, but found myself unable to. Something or someone wouldn't let me. I threw a glance back at the body of the brickmaker as a budding realization was born inside me. In this lucid moment, I finally understood why he was so desperate to get rid of the necklace. He couldn't take it off. Someone had to willingly accept it or take it by force. But as I stared and stared, a singular feeling overwhelmed all others and turned my thoughts into incoherent mush. Hunger. Insatiable hunger. So great a man was never meant to feel. Spurred by it, I leaped onto the body and sank my teeth into it. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story. Consider subscribing to my channel. You can also find the text version of the story on my Substack. The link is in the description. Until next time.